There's a moment you know. You don't need to describe it. You don't need to explain it to anyone. You know exactly what moment we're talking about. The moment when something you believed was permanent simply stopped existing. Maybe it was a person. Maybe it was a relationship. Maybe it was an entire vision of your future. Maybe it was the version of yourself you had spent years carefully constructing. And then, nothing. What comes after that moment is what nobody prepares you for. It's not just the grief. You expected the grief. What nobody warns you about is the strange emptiness that remains where you used to be. As if the loss didn't just take what left. It took with it a piece of you that you didn't even know existed until it was gone. You look in the mirror and recognize the face. But something underneath the face doesn't respond the same way anymore. That has a name. Carl Jung spent decades studying precisely this phenomenon. For him, when life destroys what he called the persona, the identity we construct to function in the world, we are not merely suffering a loss. We are being forced into an encounter we have been postponing for too long. The encounter with the true self. The one that exists beneath all the roles we learn to perform. Jung said the psyche wastes nothing. That the destruction of the persona is not a cruel accident of fate. It is a summons. And here is the point this entire episode will defend. The point the quantum train will build for you. With the precision this topic deserves, pain is not a punishment. Pain is a portal, not in a sentimental way. Not in a way that invalidates what you're feeling. In a precise, verifiable, neurological, philosophical and spiritually documented way, established by some of the most rigorous minds of the last century and this one. Today, the quantum train welcomes a passenger who could not possibly be absent from this specific topic. Viktor Frankl did not arrive on this train through theory. He arrived through the most radical experience of loss a human being can survive. A survivor of 4 Nazi concentration camps, he lost his wife, his parents, his brother, his manuscripts, his social identity, his freedom and nearly his life. And from the other side of that, he did not return a destroyed man. He returned with a question that became the foundation of logotherapy and influenced the entire existential psychology of the 20th century. The question was this: when everything is taken from you, what remains? His answer will change the way you understand what you are going through right now. And our permanent cast is complete for this episode. Alan Watts will remind us that pain is part of the dance, not the end of it. Jordan Peterson will give us the structure to turn chaos into order without pretending the chaos doesn't hurt. Carl Rogers will show us how the true self emerges when we stop performing. And Joe Dispenza, whose arrival on our train has already proven to be one of the turning points of this series, bringing a bridge between neuroscience and the quantum field that the rest of the group alone could not close with the same precision. We'll complete the cycle with the neuroscience of reconstructed identity. Hélio Couto and D'Aquila will take us beyond conventional psychology into the field of possibilities that opens precisely where the old identity collapsed. Before we go further, one thing needs to be said directly. If you're here out of intellectual curiosity, welcome. But if you're here because you're in the hole right now, because you're in the middle of a loss that still bleeds, this episode was built specifically for you, not as comfort, as a map. And maps are more useful than hugs when you're lost in the forest. If this is already landing for you, you know what to do. Share it with someone who's in the middle of a loss right now. Because one of the rawest experiences that exists is suffering without any language to understand what's happening to you. This video can be that language for someone you know. Now let's get into what matters. There is a confusion that almost everyone makes when they go through a major loss. A confusion that is, at the same time, the source of the most intense suffering and the greatest obstacle to rebuilding. The confusion between circumstance and identity. When you lose a 10-year marriage, you didn't just lose a marriage. You lost the identity that was built inside that marriage. You lost the we that organized your week, your decisions, your plans. You lost the version of yourself that existed inside those eyes that looked at you. When you lose a business, you lose more than money. You lose the entrepreneur you believed yourself to be. You lose the narrative of who you were becoming. When you lose someone you love, you lose one of the mirrors through which you saw yourself. Carl Rogers had a precise term for this. He called it incongruence, the state in which the real experience of the organism and the image the self has constructed of itself are in total collapse. For Rogers, most human suffering doesn't come from what happened. It comes from the distance between what happened and who we thought we were. And here Alan Watts steps in with that unsettling lightness he had. Watts said the problem isn't the loss itself. The problem is that we spend our entire lives constructing a solid, permanent identity for a being that is, by nature, fluid and impermanent. He used the metaphor of water trying to hold a shape. The water didn't fail when the shape broke. The shape was always temporary. The water continues being water. There's something simultaneously irritating and liberating about that idea, especially when you're in the middle of the pain. Irritating because it seems like he's minimizing what you lost. Liberating when you understand that he's not talking about what you lost. He's talking about what you are beneath everything you lost. Viktor Frankl went further than any metaphor when concentration camp guards stripped his clothes, shaved his head, confiscated his possessions, and killed the people he loved. He noticed something that later became the center of his entire body of work. He noticed there was one thing they could not take, not for lack of trying, by structural impossibility: the freedom to choose how to respond to what happens. Frankl called this the last of the human freedoms, and he gave it another name as well: meaning. As long as you can choose the meaning you assign to your experience, he said, no one can destroy who you fundamentally are. They can destroy everything around you. The core remains. An honest note before we continue. This idea of Frankl's can sound, in certain popular translations, like a form of forced optimism. Like he was saying, look on the bright side. He wasn't. Frankl was the first to say that life in the camps was an indescribable horror and that any romanticization of it would be obscene. He was not preaching toxic positivity. He was describing something he observed clinically in himself and in others, that even in the most extreme condition of loss, there was a dimension of identity that suffering could not reach, and that recognizing that dimension was the difference between surviving and succumbing. This has direct implications for whatever loss you're going through right now. Smaller or larger in comparison to concentration camps, the principle is identical. There is a part of you that circumstance does not define. Finding that part is the work of this episode. Jordan Peterson enters here with his characteristically unsentimental perspective. Peterson has zero patience for what he calls voluntary victimhood, when someone uses loss as a permanent justification for not rebuilding. And while that sounds harsh, he makes an important distinction worth hearing. He separates legitimate suffering, which must be honored, traversed, felt completely, from the permanent suffering narrative, which is when loss becomes identity. When you stop being someone who lost something and start being someone who is defined by the loss. There's a difference between carrying a scar and becoming the scar. And that distinction, Peterson said, is a choice, not an easy choice. A choice that requires more courage than almost anything else, but a choice. Now an exercise. Simple in instruction, honest in what it will ask of you. Get a piece of paper or open the Notes app wherever you are. Divide the page into 3 columns. In the first column, write what was lost. Don't hold back. The relationship, the person, the business, the health, the dream, the version of yourself. Write everything. In the second column, next to each item, write whether that thing was a circumstance of your life or a characteristic of what you actually are. Be honest. The job was circumstance. The relationship was circumstance. The health was circumstance. Even the person you lost, as painful as it is to recognize, was part of the circumstance of your life, not the source of what you are. In the third column, write only one thing, What remains after removing all of it? You'll discover that more remains than you expected. And that what remains is, possibly, the most important thing. This is the rebirth in 3 layers, simple on the surface, deep in what it reveals. Now let's step away from the philosophical for a few minutes and walk into the lab. Because one of the things the quantum train has always refused to do is ask you to believe something based on intuition alone when science already has verifiable answers. And on what happens to identity after a major loss, neuroscience has a great deal to say. Joe Dispenza's arrival on our train has been, as many of you have already noticed across the last several episodes, a turning point for this series. Not because he is the most philosophical of our passengers, but because he does something the others don't do with the same precision. He translates the invisible field of internal transformation into a language the rational brain can actually verify. And when you're in the middle of a loss, the rational brain is frequently the last part to accept that rebuilding is possible. Dispenza speaks directly to that resistant part. So let's hear what neuroscience has to say about what's happening when your identity collapses. Dispenza explains that identity is, in neurological terms, a set of established circuits in the brain built through emotional repetition over time. Every time you thought, I am a parent, I am a business owner, I am part of this relationship, you activated a circuit. Every time you felt pride, belonging, purpose within those identities, you reinforced specific chemicals in the body: dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin. Over time, these circuits become so consolidated that the body literally doesn't know how to feel any other way. When the loss happens, it isn't just emotional, it's biochemical. The body was addicted to being that identity, and when it's gone, the body goes into withdrawal. This is not a metaphor. It's what research in effective neuroscience shows. The absence of a significant relationship activates the same pain circuits as a physical injury. The phrase broken heart is literally true in terms of neurological activation. The same regions that process physical pain process social loss. Americans know this pattern well. Think about what happened after 2008. Millions of people didn't just lose money. They lost the identity of the homeowner, the business owner, the provider. The psychological collapse was inseparable from the financial one. The Puritan work ethic that runs deep in this culture made it even harder, because for generations, what you do and what you own has been treated as what you are. When those things went away, people didn't just feel broke, they felt erased. Dispenza's most important contribution to this topic is this: if identity is a set of neural circuits, then rebuilding identity is literally the creation of new circuits. And that is possible. Neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to form new connections, has no expiration date. It doesn't work only for children. It works for anyone who deliberately exposes their brain to new, repeated emotional experiences. In other words, who you become after the loss is not determined by what you lost. It is determined by what you deliberately practice feeling and thinking from. Here forward, that is not positive thinking. That is biology. Hélio Couto and Aquila step in here with a perspective that goes beyond neuroplasticity without contradicting it. For Hélio Couto, what neuroscience calls the formation of new circuits, quantum thinking calls a retuning of frequency. Identity is not merely neural. It is an information field that you emit, and that attracts responses from the environment according to your internal coherence. And there is something precise in this worth examining. When you go through a major loss without processing it, without converting that energy, the field you emit carries the signature of rupture, not through cosmic punishment, through physics. A system in coherence attracts resonance. A system in fragmentation repels coherence. Rebuilding identity, from this perspective, is not merely psychological. It is a reorganization of the field that you are. Jung connects these two worlds with elegance. For him, individuation, the process by which a person becomes who they truly are rather than who they were conditioned to be, frequently only begins after a major rupture. The persona we build to function socially rarely coincides with the deep self loss. When traversed with awareness, has the effect of removing layers of persona that were never truly ours. What hurts, then, is not only the loss of what went away, it is also the discomfort of meeting what was always there. Watts would have said, with that smile you can hear in his recordings even without seeing his face, crisis is not the enemy of transformation, it is the very mechanism of it. You cannot reach a new shore without leaving the other one. Frankl would complete, and what you carry from the old shore to the new is not the circumstances. It is the meaning you chose to extract from them. If this is resonating, you know what to do. The algorithm works simply. The more people watch to the end and engage, the more this content reaches who needs it. And this specific topic reaches people who are at rock bottom without knowing there's a way up. Like, comment, share. Not for the channel, for those people. In the next chapter, we step away from theory completely and into real cases of transformation. People who lost everything and rebuilt an identity that could not have existed without the destruction that came before. The names will surprise you. Every theory needs flesh. And the flesh of this episode is the stories of people who not only survived the loss of identity but built something that could never have existed without it. People for whom the whole was not the end. It was the foundation. We begin with Viktor Frankl himself, because his story is the most documented and radical case that exists on this subject. When Frankl emerged from the concentration camps in 1945, he had lost almost everything. His wife Tilly had died at Bergen-Belsen. His parents did not survive. His brother died at Auschwitz. The manuscript of his first book, which he had hidden sewn inside his coat and which was confiscated upon arrival at the camp, was destroyed. He was 39 years old, weighed less than 90 pounds, and had none of the external anchors that define a social identity. What did he do? He dictated the entire book from memory in 9 consecutive days, not because he was fine, because he had discovered, inside the camps, that the act of giving meaning to experience was more powerful than the experience itself. Man's Search for Meaning was published in 1946 and became one of the best-selling books in history, translated into more than 50 languages. The identity that emerged from complete destruction was, possibly, the most real and enduring one Frankl could ever have built. The second case is someone you almost certainly know by name, but perhaps not from this angle. Before J.K. Rowling became the wealthiest author in the history of modern literature, she reached a point she herself described as the most comprehensive failure an adult life could produce short of dying. A single mother, unemployed, clinically depressed, dependent on government welfare in Britain, with a dissolved marriage and a baby. She had lost the identity of wife, of professional, of daughter. Her mother had died shortly before, and any narrative of the future she had constructed. In a commencement address she gave at Harvard years later, she said something that echoes Frankl with surprising precision. Failure stripped away everything that was inessential. When there is nothing left to lose, the only question that remains is the only one that ever mattered. What do you actually want to build? Harry Potter was born on that unheated apartment floor. Not despite the collapse, because of it. Carl Jung appears here not as theorist but as clinical case, because he also went through his own identity collapse. After the rupture with Freud in 1913, which for Jung was not just the end of a friendship but the destruction of an entire structure of intellectual belonging and professional identity, he entered a period he later called the confrontation with the unconscious. For nearly 6 years, Jung went through experiences he himself described as bordering between genius and madness. Visions, invasive dreams, loss of sense of reality. Instead of fleeing, he dove in. He documented everything in what became known as the Red Book, which remained unpublished for decades. And from that plunge into his own destruction, emerged the entire edifice of analytical psychology, the theory of archetypes. Individuation, the shadow, the self. Jung built everything on the rubble of the crisis. The pattern is becoming visible. This is not inspiration, it is structure. In each of these cases, what happened was technically identical. An identity constructed over years collapsed completely. And instead of being the end of the story, the collapse was the beginning of the real story. Jordan Peterson, who has studied these patterns extensively in comparative mythology and psychology, has an explanation that is uncomfortable enough to be worth stating. He says the dragon you avoid confronting grows in the darkness where you left it. Loss forces the encounter you were postponing, and the dragon that seemed terrifying from a distance, when finally faced, turns out to be the guardian of something you needed. Rogers would put it more gently. The human organism, when freed from externally imposed conditions of worth, tends naturally toward growth. Loss, when it removes the artificial structures of identity, frequently removes the chains those structures carried. Hélio Couto would add that each of these cases represents a retuning of field. The old identity had a vibrational ceiling determined by the structures that composed it. The new identity, born after the collapse, has no such ceiling. It begins from a higher frequency because it begins from the inside out, not the outside in. And Dispenza would close with the neurological observation that ties everything together. In these cases of post-loss transformation, what neuroimaging would show is exactly what neuroplasticity research predicts. When the old identity circuits are undone by loss, and when the person deliberately chooses new emotional experiences instead of repeating the suffering loop, new circuits form with a distinct characteristic from the old ones. They are built from conscious choice, not automatic conditioning. That makes them structurally more stable. A chosen identity is more durable than an inherited one. You don't need to have survived concentration camps for this to apply to you. You don't need to be Rowling or Jung for the pattern to work. The pattern does not select special cases. The pattern is the universal mechanism by which human beings rebuild themselves. The only condition is traversing the process instead of rooting around it. We have reached the heart of the episode. And before the protocol, one last thing needs to be said clearly. This process is not linear. You will not do the 7 days of the protocol and wake up on the 8th day as a new person without pain. The rebuilding of identity happens in layers, in a spiral, with advances and regressions that feel like failure but are part of the structure. Nobody said it would be straight. They said, and science confirms, that it works. The quantum identity protocol you are about to receive was built on the pillars we have traveled together. In this episode, it has Dispenza's neuroscience. It has Jungian depth. It has Frankl's structure of meaning. It has Rogers' phenomenological gentleness. It has Peterson's precision. It has Hélio Couto's quantum field. And it has Watt's wisdom about releasing what cannot be held. 7 days, 1 practice per day. Each one builds on the one before. Day 1, naming the break, set aside 15 minutes. No music, no distraction. Sit somewhere quiet and write, in detail, exactly what was lost, not what you feel about it yet. Just what was lost, concrete, specific. No interpretation yet. Naming precisely is the first act of sovereignty over the experience. What has no name has power over you. What has a name, you have the power to work with. Day 2, separating identity from circumstance. Take what you wrote on day 1 and next to each item write one word, circumstance or essence. Be radical in that separation. Most of what we lose is circumstance. The work of day 2 is to begin seeing what remains in the essence column. It will feel like very little at first. It is not very little, it is the foundation. Day 3, quantum breathing. 20 minutes in the morning, before anything else. Lie down, close your eyes, and move through cycles of deep breathing. Long inhale through the nose, 4-second hold. Slow exhale through the mouth. While breathing, hold a single visualization. Imagine there is a version of you that has already come through this. That is standing on the other side. Don't imagine how they got there. Just feel how they feel. The emotional frequency of that version is what you are planting. Dispenza explains that breathing is not merely oxygenation. It is a mechanism for accessing the autonomic nervous system that normally operates outside conscious choice. When you combine intentional breathing with emotional visualization, you are literally introducing new biochemical information into the system. Day 4. The letter from the future. Write a letter to yourself, dated 1 year from today. Write from the perspective of who you are becoming, not who you want to be in the sense of a wish list. Who you are becoming as a direct result of what you went through. This letter must acknowledge the loss, must acknowledge the pain, and must describe what you built with what remained. Frankl would say this exercise is applied logotherapy. When you write the future meaning of the present experience, you are not denying the pain. You are giving it a direction. And pain with direction is completely different from pain without direction. Day 5. The vibrational field. Choose a physical place. It can be a corner of the room, a specific chair, a space outdoors. Go to that place with the letter you wrote on day 4. Read the letter out loud. Pay attention to what the body feels while reading, not the mind. The body, Hélio Couto and Aquila call this practice field anchoring. You are associating a physical space with a specific emotional frequency. With repetition, entering that space begins to automatically activate the frequency you cultivated. Day 6. The Fair Witness. Rogers introduced the concept of unconditional positive regard. But there is an even more powerful version, what Jung would call the witnessing of the self by the self. Today, write a paragraph about who you are being in this process of rebuilding. Not a laudatory paragraph, an honest one. Acknowledge where you are still suffering. Acknowledge where you have already moved. Acknowledge what the loss revealed in you that you didn't know was there. The fair witness is the opposite of self-criticism and the opposite of self-excuse. It is simply seeing clearly. And what you see clearly, you can deliberately choose. Day 7. The declaration of the new identity, standing out loud, looking at yourself in the mirror if possible. You will say, in your own words and with the specificity of your own story, who you are now, not who you were, not who you want, to be who you are now, at this moment, as a result of everything you have lived. It may feel strange to speak to yourself in a mirror. It may feel like you're pretending. That's normal and it's part of the process. Dispenza explains that the body does not distinguish, in terms of biochemical response, between a felt declaration and a real event, provided the declaration is accompanied by genuine emotion. You don't need to believe 100% of what you're saying on day 7. You need to feel, at least for those minutes, what it would be like if it were true. With time, the difference between the two disappears. And the mantra of this episode is not a ready-made phrase, it is an instruction. Every morning, for 30 days, before anything else, ask yourself out loud, who am I choosing to be today? Not who you're going to try to be, not who you hope to become, who you are choosing to be right now, today, with what you have. The answer will change, will evolve, will surprise you. But the act of asking, repeated with consistency, creates the most important neural habit that exists. The habit of being the author of your own identity rather than the product of your circumstances. One last thing before we close. This episode mentioned that identity and prosperity are born from the same process. That was not accidental. In the next episode of The Quantum Train, we will explore exactly how the collapse of relationships has a direct relationship with the awakening of an identity that was dormant inside them. When relationships collapse, identity awakens. You will want to be on board for that one. But for today, this is the invitation that remains. Don't run from the pain. Don't accelerate the process. Don't try to skip to the result without walking the path. The pain you are feeling is not evidence that you were destroyed. It is evidence that you were built for something you don't yet know you are. And that, precisely that, is the portal. I am the quantum architect. And you did not end up here by accident.